IETF over time and stuff.
You have no idea how much I've heard about that.
Right. Well, anyway, so if we want the community to actually back it up, we should have pretty pictures and postings.
I can tell you stuff later that will make you furious. We'll just leave it at that. Let's start.
It will probably be in parallel. Oh, yes.
So, I didn't. Did you answer the question of? Did you want to run
Yeah.
share slides or?
Oh, no, no. I said either. So why don't you do it? So I'll get the timers.
All right. Welcome everybody to the DELEG BOF, the first meeting on Tuesday. Thank you. Yep.
The meeting's starting, guys.
Thank you, Suzanne. All right, so we are your reluctant chairs, Paul Hoffman and Wes Hardiker, and actually this will be good. I think there's a lot of people looking forward to this. You need to give me a slide. Yep, thanks. Reminder about the note well. I'm sure many of you know this. If you don't, consult your lawyers, but there's a lot of aspects around intellectual property that you should be aware of if you're going to participate in the IETF actively. Next. We do have a code of conduct guidelines. Basically, it's be nice to everybody. This is a respectful group, and it's easy to get in heated arguments, and try and remember that we are having a technical conversation. So use our best judgment and things like that. This session is being recorded. We beg and plead that everybody sign into Meet Echo. It's how we do Blue Sheet recording these days. Which is now an obsolete term. If you are in person, make sure you sign into either the video tool on the agenda, or you use the QR code with your phone. They both have a raise hand option for when you want to speak and you want to come to a microphone. Remote participants, please make sure that your audio and video are off unless you're actually going to be presenting, as it conserves bandwidth for people on lower bandwidth connections. And a headset, of course, is strongly recommended to avoid echo. So today we've broken the agenda into a number of different sections. We're going to have a little bit of background, which is sort of what we're going into now from the chair's perspective as well. We're going to dive into sort of what are the reasons behind why this BOF is being formed in the first place. There is an active existing draft, DNS DELEG, and there's going to be a short presentation of where that work is. I'll remind everybody that that is not yet the agreed upon body of work. It is just the one proposal that exists out there. And then there's going to be, we'll have a discussion. The better methods of DNS delegation is really more about an opportunity for everybody to talk and see if we're on the same page for a path forward. And then we do have some sample charter text that Paul and I put together that has had some discussion on the mailing list. And that's really where we would like, the active discussion for the exact wording that we want to hand this off to the AESG, assuming that we have a working group proposed avenue going forward.
So just a note on the agenda, the 30 minutes for reasons, we have some presentations for that. That's not a discussion part. If there are technical clarifications at the end of that, fine. We'll hold them all to the end. The 20 minutes on better methods, that's explicitly open mic. So again, the first one is we've got some presentations. We don't want discussion other than clarifications. The second one, absolutely, that's where we'll have discussion.
Thank you, Paul. I was actually considering that at the beginning of the slide and then forgot by the time I got to that part of the slide. Next. So status of work to date, this came out of a problem space that was discussed at the IETF 118 hackathon. And there was an initial sort of concept produced and then eventually a initial draft that was describing it. We now have a mailing list, which is probably one of the shorter acronym mailing lists that exists in the IETF.
You're welcome.
And then in DNS Op, which has a charter item for, helping propel new directions, regardless of whether it ends up in DNS Op or not. They did hold an interim in January to sort of further solidify this direction. And then, as I mentioned before, the chairs put together a proposed charter that we'll talk about later today. It was discussed on the mailing list and not a huge amount of discussion. So we're hoping it's just going to fly forward and we'll all be done an hour early, like BOFs always go.
So now we're into
Yeah,
the
so
slides.
so first up, we are going to go into slides. The agenda, we did update very recently. A lot of these slides came in late, so the agenda, if you looked at it yesterday, looks different than it does now. And
Oh,
the
no, you don't do that.
you,
You share and unshare.
yeah, you need to turn off sharing first.
Uh,
Green button.
green.
Stop,
Stop slides.
and then meeting materials folder. Yep,
Yeah, but then, oh, does this cause the slide? Yes,
it
it does.
should. Yes.
No.
Nope.
Oh, then
Share.
we do it again, and it gives you the choices. There
Yep.
we go. Yeah, very good.
You would think the seasoned IETFers would know this, but it keeps changing. All right, so first up is Roy. Roy, you are online?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
And we can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Next slide.
Sharing control.
Thanks. So my name is Roy Ahrens. I work for ICANN. I thought to put some thoughts together on what I think are the limitations of current or legacy delegations. And then I'll have some additional thoughts as well. So where we are with the current delegation issues. There is really no method to signal capabilities, right? We want to signal something like secure transport or error reporting or what have you. You currently cannot do that. You basically, the only thing you have is an NS record and some glue record. One is a string and the other one is an address. You can't really encode information in there. Another issue is the operator dependency on the registrant registrar registry chain. The issue there is if, for instance, you want to change your DS record, and hopefully you do that regularly when you add a DS and then when you remove the old DS, you basically have to go to often a clueless registrant talking to a ignorant registrar and then an overzealous registry. That is not useful. So is there another way of doing this? And I think there is another way. Another issue is that NS and glue records are not signed in the parent zone. They may be signed elsewhere, but they can only be verified after the delegated child zone is contacted, right? You want to verify before you contact. Otherwise, you just leak stuff to an adversary in the worst case. Another issue I've seen is parent and child inconsistency. Now, initially, I thought this is actually a minor thing, but if you look at it and if you talk to some operators and some security folk, it's actually a big problem. There's a current lack of standard language around this. I understand in DNS operations, folks are working on this. But yeah, resolve from maybe child or parent centric and even child sticky. Now, the last is a problem. If you're child sticky, then that might lead to security problems. This has led to confusion and misconfigurations and, like I said, security problems. So hopefully we can solve that too. So these are the limitations. So what do we want from this? And these are my thoughts only, just committed to a slide. So feel free to ignore them, but hopefully they're useful. So you really want to facilitate name server capabilities. What is a name server capable of? What transport does it support? What encoding does it do, etc., etc. We also want to add another layer of indirection, right? If you think back on the old DNSSEC, the very old DNSSEC, where you had SIG at parent, and then we had SIG at child, and then someone came up with DS records. That's another layer of indirection. We want to do the same thing for operations, right? You can basically do this independent. You can basically do independent operations, independent of the parent or independent of the registrar, registry, registrant mode. And we also want to have name server authentication, verify before use. And the last thing is we want to do this once, and hopefully, and I'm not just talking about inventing DELEG. If DELEG is for one reason or another a failure and we have to do it again, we don't want another 3-4 years. This was pushed upon me. I was made very aware of this by Paul Wouters, who had a good idea around this, and also Ben Schwartz, who also had a good idea around this. And I'll go into that in a minute. Next, please. Requirements, all right, something that has to be built in. So this is a bit of scaffolding, right? You need to have cryptographic security against downgrade attacks. You don't want to have an adversary remove this record from a response. Now you can't stop adversaries doing this. They can remove anything you like from a response, especially in line, but you want to be able to detect that. So an authoritative server must somehow include an authenticated denial to prove absence of this new record or this new set of records. And resolvers must expect these records, these authenticated denial records. And there are a few methods you can use for this. DS has been proposed. DNS key flag has been proposed. But a DNS key flag or a DS record can indicate that a resolver must expect NSEC or NSEC3 records. We also we really need to have backwards compatibility. So these new delegation methods, they should not break existing implementations, right? So the moment you throw in a new DELEG record into a referral, you can't just have these legacy resolvers fall over. Now, luckily, Shimon and I found that basically all major implementations, they ignore unknown records, and keep in mind DELEG records to legacy resolvers are unknown. And they ignore DNS key flags as well as DS types that are unknown. All right, and lastly, some food for thought. We want to have this future safe. So I think it was Ben, but also a few others I've heard about this, who asked that if we're going to do this, maybe dedicate a range of record types as parent side only, just like DS and DELEG are parent side only. So authoritative servers, they know to include them in the future without having to completely understand the nitty-gritty details of each record. Also keep in mind that NS and glue, or legacy delegations, they have a long tail due to legacy. Sorry, they have a long tail, so they will not easily go away. I mean, it's just as naive as thinking that IPv6 will completely replace IPv4. It won't. It has a long tail, and it will take a long time.
Roy, can you speak
also,
a little closer to the microphone? I just got to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're fairly quiet.
All right, I'll speak louder. I'll wake up the kids. How's that? All right. Another thing that we do, we want to avoid the inconsistency between parent and child NS, but now with a new delegation method, we actually increase inconsistency if we're not doing this in the right way. All of these things can mismatch. And lastly, and I think this is important, especially for the security folks, this DS aliasing, right? The idea that you can outsource DS record management to an operator, this requires a bridge of trust, not just a chain of trust. And I apologize for the bad naming. That implies that there needs to be a chain of trust between the trust anchor and the parent that does the aliasing, and also a chain of trust between the trust anchor and the alias itself. So it's naive to think that if you're under an unsigned top-level domain, that DELEG can bring you something signed. It can't. It doesn't work that way. Security doesn't work that way. You can't upgrade. You can only manage, but you can't upgrade from unsecured to secure. So this needs strong wording in whatever document is going to come out of this workflow. All right, that's it for me. Back to you guys, and thanks.
Well, does anybody have clarifying questions for Roy?
Oh, I thought we were going to have them all at the end.
Let's do them individually, just because it's about that conversation.
Okay.
But yes.
And I didn't see
Any clarifying questions for Roy?
John Clenson entered the queue.
John Clenson?
Hi, I was about to type this in the chat, but let's try it here. This makes sense in the degree to which I understand it in this brief explanation for ICANN level registrations, where, for example, the registrar registry chain Roy talked about is relevant. Could a few words be said about what you expect this to do or mean for intra-company registrations or other things 3 or 4 levels down the tree? Seems to imply a lot of overhead from that.
All right. So this new layer of indirection that DELEG is proposing is called alias mode in DELEG. is not just useful to circumvent registrar, registry, registrant model. It's also useful to basically have a single organization. Let's say a very large company who have many different brands. They can basically put all of their DS management, all of their delegation signer management into one organization, into one zone, instead of having to manage each individual domain. They can now just manage one zone, right? Where all the security stuff, all the DS records basically are outsourced to. I hope that makes sense.
It makes sense. I'd be more concerned about small and medium level companies, but let's not take up meeting time about that.
All right. Thanks for your
So other
question,
people
John.
have problems with it.
Jeff?
Thanks, Jeff Houston. Hi, Roy. Ultra short clarification question. Instead of 30 seconds, can I ask for 60 seconds about the term bridge of trust? I am still slightly confused about what you're talking about. And if you could just describe it in a little more detail, I'll probably be with you. Thank you.
All right, I'll give that a try. I'll do it really quick, 60 seconds. You first have a chain of trust to that parent. The parent has com has example.com, right? Example.com is delegated using a DELEG method, right, to example.org. Example.org now contains the DS record information. Does it make sense? So you now have to trust a chain to example.com, sorry, a chain to com and a chain to example.org.
Okay, the
That's
challenge
it.
was to do it there. I'm still confused, but time has run out. We might take it up later.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so the next presentation we have is Manu.
If you could be quick, that would be great. Yeah, we sort of blew through that one.
All right, so I'm Manu Brotel from Meta. There is some kind of repeat on what Roy said here, so I'm going to skip over that. NS record itself is pretty limited. Nowadays, we have encrypted protocols such as DOT, DOQ, DOH, DOH3, and probably other ones in the future. And we have support in the recursive and authoritative name servers, but no good ways of deploying it. The bootstrapping system is not great yet. It's either handshaking and agreeing on, this is my cert and you can come to me and talk DOT. Eventually, Deprive came with the opportunistic probing unilateral encrypted DNS, however the right name is. It does help with adoption, even more so since Google Public DNS, for instance, started using it, but it's not protecting against active attacks. Like you can still downgrade the protocol. So essentially, we need something to signal from the parents, like the features or capabilities that the child can support. Just like we have the DS record to signal DNSSEC, but we can really add a new resource record for every type of capabilities and stuff. So we need something which is kind of extensible and that can, over time, evolve without needing to go back through the whole chain involving the DNS pipeline. Next, please. And another thing that I think will be important, there's mitigated opinion on that. But at the moment, whatever you set in the parent is gone live. It's going to take TTL time for a client to pick it up. If you made a mistake, it will take TTL time for them to get your revert. And as much as with standard name servers, without considering secure protocol, it's fine. Recursive name servers are doing a good job at falling back onto other name servers. When it comes to enabling a secure protocol, typically you don't really want them to downgrade, right? So we've all heard of stories of enabling DNSSEC and things not going as they should be. It would be the same for encrypted protocols. So it would be nice to provide some kind of experimental support, just like SPF has in the past provided the permissive support, like you could start enabling the record in permissive mode that allows you to gather data, understand how is your operation going, and then eventually upgrade to proper support. All right, I guess I can close it here. Yep.
All right, any quick clarifying questions? All right, hearing none, thank you. And we will go on to the next presentation. Ben.
Hello. All right, next slide. So I just want to focus on one specific reason that I am particularly excited about DELEG, and that is that right now, for encrypted DNS, ADOT, we sometimes call it, authoritative DNS over TLS, the only actual specification we've agreed on is 9539, essentially unilateral probing. And this provides opportunistic security, which I am supportive of. It's a good start. But opportunistic security is actually an incentive for the attackers to deploy downgrade attacks and to deploy them as widely as possible. And the downgrade attacks here are totally trivial to deploy. So yes, we've like created a cool test bed. That's good. But we've also set ourselves up for failure. We basically told we've painted we put on a T-shirt that says "Kick me." So I think we really need to do better. And to do better, we need downgrade resistance, so that if you try to deploy that downgrade attack, what you get instead is an outage and a million complaining users, instead of silently gaining access to be able to view and maybe modify everybody's DNS traffic. And we need that downgrade resistance to really be widely deployed. If it's just a few weird resolvers that go in for some extra special mode where you get downgrade resistance, then this is not going to help. Those few users are just going to get an outage when somebody wants to deploy a downgrade attack. So we really, in my view, need widely deployed downgrade resistance. And the only way that can happen is if it can be deployed without slowing down normal resolution. We are not going to, I think, be able to get to a world where every resolver in the world is willing to pay a 1 RTT penalty on all resolution, never mind however many RTTs it would actually take, to figure out if a resolver has DOT before issuing any queries to it. So that means we need to do this without slowing down normal resolution, and that means we need to know authoritatively whether we can encrypt, whether a resolver is running encrypted protocols during the delegation. So we need some more, we need a richer delegation capability, and that's DELEG. So my dream scenario for this is that if you're a small local ISP and you download a software package for one of the major popular resolver implementations and you turn it on, it is downgrade resistant by default. It understands DELEG. It sees the right information to say, if we're an authoritative services, I really support DOT and you should use it if you can. And it respects that. And also in my dream scenario, at least some of the major TLDs are also interested in this. We don't need all the TLDs to be interested, but we need some. And that's enough to get us to a world where you can connect to www.example.org and the byte string example never appears on the wire at all. Never. Not between you and next slide. So this is just kind of a map of all of the different standards and things that we've developed over the last, I don't know, five or so years that make it possible to fully keep effectively the second level domains private on the wire. And so there's a lot of different pieces involved here. But I think DELEG is essentially the last piece of the puzzle that gets us to the world that I would like to live in. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Any clarifying questions for Ben's excitement? All right, hearing none. Mike Bishop, please go ahead.
I'm just relaying this on.
Yes.
Okay. Relaying from the chat, there are several people asking whether downgrade attacks have actually been observed in the wild. So just passing that on.
Yeah, I believe we have already seen this category of downgrade attack. Although there's a little I guess there's some subtlety about whether you think the downgrade attack is against exactly RFC 9539 or whether it's against essentially other uses of DOT. But I think that distinction probably isn't too important.
All right. Anybody else have questions? Why don't we open the floor to, are there any questions at all for, before we go on, the next
This is the
presentation?
last one, so-
Oh, is this the last one? I'm
Yeah,
sorry. My
so why
bad.
don't we wait till after?
You're right. So Peter.
Okay, hi, it's Peter Thomason. Next slide. I guess the debound effort and that it didn't come to any conclusion is well known. So it's about expressing domain boundaries within the DNS that are not technical zone cut boundaries. So I'll quickly give an overview of what kind of flavors there are, and then on the next slide I'll have how that relates to potential delegation efforts. So one application is that the parent may want to announce that it controls policy of its children. For example, .bank, I think, wants to enforce a DMARC policy for all .bank registered names. But the DMARC specification doesn't allow the public suffix of a name to do that, because the way the lookup works is that it's looked up before the public suffix, the label before. So it currently can't be done, and this would be one application. And there's probably others. So this is like not a DMARC specific problem. Then the parent might also want to declare the inverse, that they don't govern policy for their children. For example, when they are a public suffix, like, I don't know, s3.amazonaws.com, and they want to say, we don't control each of our children, and we don't want whatever cookie scope to be shared across them or something. So that's what the public suffix list currently addresses, and it kind of works fine-ish. And it's a lot of work for those volunteers, but in particular, it's also out of band. It's not really a DNS innate way of expressing this. And then if the parent doesn't express that, like if the parent doesn't say, my child's independent, but the child actually is, then the child might want to declare that some way, and there currently is also no way to do that. So for example, if s3.amazonaws.com, which is a public suffix, was not on the public suffix list because Amazon, for example, didn't care, then it would be nice if the registered name under it could declare, well, I don't want to share cookies with any other sibling domain names. So all these different kinds of boundaries might or might not coincide with DNS delegations. So for example, co.uk is a zone cut under .uk. So there's two zones actually, but it's not an organizational domain boundary. It's only a technical one. And the inverse can also happen. As I mentioned earlier, the Amazon example, they actually have a bunch of customer domains under their public suffix, but they are not delegations from a technical point of view. They're just in the same zone, but still there is a domain boundary in terms of cookie scoping and whatever between the S3 storage buckets. And there's probably lots of other examples. I just try to give an overview of different types of them. And so that's the problem space that the debound effort tried to address. Next slide. So the question is whether better boundaries can be achieved with better delegations, and if we are talking, DELEG and whatever. So let's see how we can get this. So one interesting approach for the declarations that the parent makes would be if there could be policy-only delegations. So essentially without pointing at a name server or without any glue, just the key value pairs that the SVCB records allows, and then make the name server stuff optional. So you could have a DELEG record at a non-zone cut saying policy equals sovereign or policy equals enforce DMARC or whatever. And that could express that stuff. I'm not saying that's how it should be done. I'm just saying that a delegation conceptually is not necessarily a name server delegation. And if we consider the name server stuff to be just key value attributes like the DOT stuff or the glue stuff or the DS stuff or whatever else we put in there, we might want to put in policy and allow them to be combined with other key value stuff, but not necessarily have to. So this would be delegations that don't create a zone cut and don't create a new child apex. And probably there's lots of weird stuff when you think that through, but I think we should think it through. And then for the stuff that the child declares, I think, well, I don't know how to solve that, but it's part of the problem space. And so one could, for example, think
that if the DELEG record parameters are somehow populated through the child and then the parent does some processing, like, I don't know, csync type of thing or whatever we'll do, then we could think about whether that could include provisioning of child-side policy statements into the delegation that gets populated from the child side. I don't know how that could work, but it would be really nice if the way we refactor the delegation stuff would allow us to also fix the debound effort. I don't know if there's any clarifying questions, otherwise.
That was going to be my question. Does anybody have clarifying questions for Peter? Looks like John Levine is
Mr. Debound.
Mr. Debound, yes. John, go ahead.
Yeah, hi there. This is somewhere between a question and a comment. I mean, I think there's two reasons that debound failed. One was that the web browsers didn't want to do an extra DNS lookup, and I don't see how this fixes that. And the other is that there are completely unresolved questions about if someone claims there's a boundary, do you believe them? You know, and so I did something with text records. It's actually not all that different from this. So I guess the question here is, if we did this, first, how do you fix the performance problems? But the other problem is sort of how do you fix the policy questions of knowing when to believe this? Because there's lots of children who will say, "Oh, if you think you get spam from me, just tell me. Don't tell my parent." You know, and that's, you know, and you want some way for the parents to say, "No, you can't do that." You know, and I'm not saying that we can fix it here. I'm just saying that we couldn't fix it in DELEG. And this doesn't seem all that different from what we tried before that it looks all that promising.
All right, I think that wasn't the question, so I don't have an answer.
All right, any more clarifying questions? All right, seeing none. So one brief pause. So what we have seen so far today has been really about the problem space, you know, what the motivations are for fixing it, what possible new shiny things we can do if this was actually deployed. I will say that later, you know, we will have a charter discussion and we will have to figure out what are the initial, you know, bites that we want to propose to the AESG that can be done. And we probably don't want to tackle everything under the sun. We need to chunk things off into appropriate bite-sized pieces. Are there any questions at all related to what we have just seen? The next presentation will be about the initial work that's been done as one proposed solution. But any clarifying questions or any clarifying questions related to the problem space at this point? Not active discussion about complaining about whether it is the right problem space or not.
He's getting up for the next one. Okay.
All right, seeing none. So let's move on next to the proponents of the initial body of work that has sort of started this direction.
Hello, fellow DNS enthusiasts. We can just skip right past that. Or do I
Hang on a sec, let me just do, I don't even know.
We only have 3 slides. I don't care who clicks.
Right now, I just want to turn on the timer.
Thanks. There we go. So many of you in the room may not have seen what we're proposing as a means of updating delegations. And so this is why this quick review is right here. In the simplest form, it basically just mimics an NS record, except it has the ability to sign and include the glue address records right in the delegation itself. But then there's also this proposed, what's currently called alias mode based on service bindings use of the term. And it very much looks like a service binding record in the DELEG. You specify a flag 0 that says, oh, to find out how you should be resolving this domain, go ahead and look up this other name where you will find a service binding record that will give you the parameters that you need. So that's the basics of DELEG.
Do you want to talk about this? What you get when you?
Sure.
Yeah. You're good with time.
Oh, okay. Well, so just again, in this particular example with the alias mode, DELEG points to a name that you look up, and in that it has a number of service binding parameters. In the simplest form, that is where you would get the address glue that you might need to contact servers and so on. So our motivations have already been pretty well covered by a lot of like what Roy and the other presenters said initially, as far as we wanted to first secure the delegation. actually, I'm going to jump to the end because this whole thing that happened at Prague, even though I was kind of warned away from talking about this, basically, Petter came up with, wanted to discuss at the Prague Hackathon, how can we possibly work on some of the big problems in the DNS? What are you unhappy with the DNS? What do you want to work on solving? And our discussion kind of quickly coalesced around the ability of, we'd want to kind of reset the baseline. Be able to say, hey, this server you're talking to, without having to probe it, you'll know that it has a new, you're not expecting it to necessarily be 1986 DNS. You're going to be talking to a modern name server that understands a lot of the current expectations of what a name server should do. And so one of the ways that quickly materialized out of that was, well, if we had the delegation actually told us that, it wouldn't require additional probing, additional lookups to find out whether that was true. The limitation, as pointed out by Roy, of having just the NS record is all you have is a name, and the only expectation you have at that point is that you're going to be able to talk to it on port 53. At UDP port 53, you can't even count on it talking TCP to you. And so we wanted to provide this additional information that indicates ways you can do, and possibly even then provide an off-ramp to an updated DNS protocol. DNS v2 has been talked about for a long time. There are some people that do kind of object philosophically to using this as a way to leverage into DNS v2 because to their particular worldview, then it isn't even DNS anymore. So we'll call that, instead of the domain system, we'll just call it die nächste System in German, and we'll also call it DNS, and this provides an off-ramp into that, a new way of possibly using protocol to resolve things while retaining the semantics of the original namespace. Because one of the other goals that we came up with was we needed a way to not be that disruptive to existing software. We needed that way to not be that disruptive to existing business models that exist among domainers and various ICANN constituencies and so on, and to not be that disruptive to registries. And so the thought was, if we had a new record type that becomes parent-side only, there's going to be some work that has to be done by people, all layers of software, resolvers, authorities, registries, in order to accommodate this. But if we could get it done once, then we could leverage that to a number of different goals throughout the process. And so one of them was to secure the delegation. Right now, while it is true that you can, your delegation is still secured, it's an after the fact check. Since the NS records aren't signed and the GLUE records aren't signed, you get to, oh, did I just misstate that? GLUE records are not signed, right? But in any event, you can end up in a situation where you misdirect queries to another server. Now, they won't validate after that, but you are still informing a rogue name server possibly of what your query intention is. So we want to secure all of that information at the parent side to say, here is your chain of trust to get to the name servers that are going to resolve your queries. We also quickly, because we had participants from all sectors of the industry, we have operators and registries all sitting in on this roundtable discussing the possibilities. One of the things is, like, we could use this to actually leverage the difficulties that operators currently have, and we've tried to solve through other methods like CDS and CDNS key and CSync to update DNSSEC information from the child to the parent. This was another way to kind of take out the need of having registrants have to update their registrar to push data to the registry anytime they want to change the DS record, for example, because we would be able to say this operator is going to handle all that, and we can establish a chain of trust through going through the operator. And as many of you have known, we have created multiple proposals in the IETF about other underlying transport mechanisms for doing DNS. DNS over TLS, DNS over QUIC, DNS over HTTPS. All of those, if you want to reach them right now, you have to have external knowledge, out-of-band knowledge as far as how to reach those authoritative name servers, or in the case of a resolver. But we're thinking of the authoritative case here. And this also seemed to be a great message to advertise, a great method to advertise the capabilities of a name server, and says, oh, well, you can talk to us on UDP 53 over here, but if you want upgraded security, you can also talk to us on QUIC over here. And I already adjusted the extensibility piece. that really was a main motivator for us, because we're not just trying to solve the problems of securing the delegation or directing to other transports. We actually see a future where this addresses a number of other problems while doing the groundwork of getting the registries and the authorities and the resolvers all updated at once, and then being able to leverage that from the future. So we did have some positive initial results. As I mentioned, we had a number of people that were present at the hackathon, and then we socialized to later saying, hey, this is what we're thinking of doing. We had resolvers and authoritative server implementers in the room, and they were encouraged by it. There are a number of registries that were also present for the discussions, and were like, yeah, I could see this working. And then, of course, operators definitely like Akamai and Cloudflare, like the possibility that they would be able to ease some of their operations management. And at the most recent DNS org, I will qualify this remark to say Paul Makapetris did not give a full-throated endorsement of, yes, do DELEG the way you should do DELEG, but he did get up after my presentation there and basically comment that when he originally came up with the DNS, he imagined it as being a series of different modules that were all on little 3x5 cards. And over time, you'd be able to replace, one of these 3x5 cards with a new way of doing things. And one of those cards was delegations. So he is supportive of the general idea of being able to work on delegations, not being stuck with the way he came up with it in the 1980s. But nonetheless, I will be clear, he has not specifically said, yes, you guys should do DELEG. But I found it encouraging nonetheless that he was still supportive of all of us working on some new form of delegation, whatever it may be. And then also, Roy and Schumann did a fair bit of work testing our initial assumption, which was that, well, if we put a new record in the parent that we return in the delegation along with NS and DS records, would resolvers be able to continue to resolve the domain even if they were legacy resolvers? And also, if we started putting in some of the ideas we had for securing that delegation, for example, not allowing downgrade attacks that say, oh, there's no deleg in this domain, even though there was, would we be able to secure that through a little bit of additional finagling with the DNSSEC metadata? And the answer to both of those questions was very positive throughout their tests. I think they only encountered one or two very minor issues, as I recall. They're going to be publishing on the web their results, but by and large, all of the major software versions handled the idea of this new record type in a delegation just fine, to both be able to use the old delegation, and then there's been some additional work done to, can you use the new delegation information data? And that's really straightforward, and that's been positive too. I think actually Willem has done some of that in Not, for example, correct? No. We'll do a survey of just where that is. Expect, we're going to plan on having a draft 01 probably. Does depend a little bit on the outcome of this BOF, but the authors are still encouraged to keep working on this. And we will start a software implementation survey of, who's done what and where it might be able to work. There are a number of open issues, though. We don't, pretend that it's baked. As has come up with the first draft, is the draft itself needs some more clarity and better flow for explaining how things work. Then there are some additional questions like, well, one of our intentions is to secure DELEG with DNSSEC by signing the record itself. But if you have a DELEG record that is not secured with DNS, then what should the behavior be? For example, if you are getting a transport DELEG that says, oh, I want you to speak DNS over TLS with this TLSA information to this name server. Well, if it's not secured with DNSSEC, you probably shouldn't trust it, right? And none of that has really been specified yet. We also have a question about, could there be a signal that happens in the query from the resolver that indicates, hey, I'm DELEG aware, so maybe only send me DELEG information, for example, to keep my packet size smaller. So there are some questions like that. There are also, the basic idea that we've talked about so far with delegations has been this idea that you're specifying the parameters of the authority that you want to talk to next. And so one of the questions is, well, can you actually specify properties of the zone even if it's not specifically tied to an authority? And we do have some ideas about that. And one of them was, as Peter had, You could do something like dbound, where you're trying to specify an attribute of something below the zone cut. And right now, there's nothing really supporting that in the draft, but there is this idea of, well, you could specify a target name of dot, for example, which would say, oh, this isn't really about a name server you're supposed to talk to. This is, indicating attributes of the delegation. And then, of course, we also have, it's come up on the mailing list, should other attributes of the alias mode deleg, this one where you redirect to an operator, a third-party operator, should attributes be able to go on that, right? Like one of the goals originally in coming up with this idea of having this operator mode was that you would just specify the target name and everything you needed was at their end, so that you are not relying on the customer to update their delegation data with their registry. So if you add other information into that, you are kind of subverting the attention there. And we have to work out, well, is that really an important thing to want to do? Add these attributes into also the alias mode? Are there some that maybe do make sense there or not? It hasn't been investigated very fully, so that's what makes it an open issue. And there are also some open questions. For example, one thing that I know that Willem definitely did do was he added a flag to signing that will auto-generate NS records from your DELEG records. But this is not necessarily something you want to do. You can imagine an operational situation where you want to say, well, for all the legacy non-DELEG resolvers, I want to point them to this set of name servers, and ones that understand DELEG, I want them to go to a different set of name servers. They can be, they can be the same, but they could be different. And so one of the questions that has come up is, well, okay, what should you do? Resolvers have traditionally been very greedy in trying to get an answer by whatever means they can. So if DELEG failed, maybe they'd want to fall back to NS. But we should provide some guidance on that, because one of the things that many of you have seen recently is that as some types of attacks, resource consumption attacks have sprung up. There have been ways to essentially, shut down operations on a name server by having it chase a lot of work that it never really gets resolved. And maybe one of those is, oh, I'm going to give you a bunch of DELEG records to try before you go to NS or something. And then, so a fair question is, do we need some idea of how we limit work through this? And of course, as many of you have already brought up, both in the chat and on the mailing list, you all have your own ideas about why this is a bad idea, this particular approach. And so, there could be other open issues that I have not listed here that point to, perhaps not even taking a DELEG-based approach. But this list of open issues was essentially focused around, if we do DELEG, here are things that we have to sort out for DELEG.
All right. Thanks very much. I think given time, we will probably move into we have a 20-minute discussion starting for the more general questions of, okay, you've heard the problem space. You've heard one proposed solution. It's not the adopted proposed solution yet. What do people think? Is this a tractable problem? Is this a problem the IETF should solve? Is it well enough understood? Is it something that implementers and operators all want solved? We've heard a lot of positive things. Does anybody have I'll remind everybody that we have yet to actually get to the point of selecting the proposed approach. So there's one that's in very heavy development, but there's more potentially coming in the future. We'll work about that when the working group's actually formed. So with that, Paul Wooters, we'll start with you.
Okay, I have a question. Can I sit down?
Yeah, you can sit down if you want. He jumped the queue to ask that question.
Okay, Paul. Okay, sorry. So I'll try to raise a few brief points. I think the problem space is mostly that the DNS hoster cannot update records like the NS and the DS record, and that is quite separate from all the zone properties you want to relay. If the DNS hoster could actually update these records, then we would have less of a problem. And so the alias mode is a really good thing where we can sort of redirect that and move that to the DNS hoster so that they can update it. But if you have that, then you have actually most of the solution, because if you split the name server properties from the zone properties, a lot of problems that DELEG tries to solve fall away. If you assume that the name server zones contain no secrets, so you have like a name server let's call them like you know, a big company -nameserver.com. There's nothing secret in there except name server names. Then you don't have to worry about the initial bootstrap and all this in bailiwick things of problems, and you're leaking the target DNS name, because you're only leaking name server names. And that's not really a big problem, because there are big hosts where you do this, where you sort of get your privacy back. So, and the additional problem is that if you allow name server information like which certificates to use or other properties or which transports are available, if you put that in the zone, the problem becomes if these name servers do something by accident, like rolling their key, then now you have a million zones that you need to update because your name server has changed. And fundamentally, the name server properties belong with the name server, and whoever runs the name server and the name server zone should be able to update those independent of the zones it's serving. And I think that those are the main keys. I have other issues that I talked about before, but I'll yield the microphone and I'll bring the rest of the list.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Jared?
Hi. Oh, Jared Mach. You know, Akamai, but this is really, you know, unrelated to Akamai. I think we have an existential question here about, do we, you know, to the extent that we want to preserve some amount of backwards compatibility and the historical software on the internet. You know, there's many of them that are an operational scourge. I would say, but I think there's also there's I think many admirable goals here. I do think that we need to try to narrow some of the solution space. Trying to do DNS over every protocol and every transport, I don't think is long-term sustainable, especially when there's going to be continuing advances in things like cipher suites and other types of technologies, and how you communicate what you support. We've already seen that be, you know, an issue in a number of different either software and how you can configure it and such. And so we're going to have to be very careful in how anything is rolled out to ensure some level of backwards compatibility, and as well as the fact that many of us are depending upon open source libraries, you know, like the SSL libraries. They may make a decision to deprecate it because their primary use case is for a web transport. And as Paul was just mentioning, maybe not every, you know, maybe it needs to be a secure transport, but the privacy level of it, depending upon the nature of the query or such, you know, may be very different. So we have to be very careful here and in what we do. And that's my thoughts for the group.
I think deployability is definitely a critical aspect. Jim?
Thanks, Wes. I think this is a very good idea, and it's certainly something that falls within the IETF remit, and probably a working group is needed. I am concerned, though, about various aspects of what's being discussed here. Some of the use cases don't appear to be all that clearly defined at the moment. Fair enough for an early stage of things. But the fact that we've got people here that may have different expectations of what DELEG can and can actually solve. And I think if we do get a working group formed, these issues may either be clashing with each other, or they've got competing priorities, and that will be a difficult thing for whoever's going to chair the working group to try and manage it, or at least control in some ways. Some people seem to think it's going to be about discovery for new transports for DNS. Other people talk about improving key changes and key signatures and all the rest of it. We're talking about an extensible mechanism, and the extensible mechanism is a word that always gives me the heebie-jeebies. So I think we have to be very careful about this and how we specify the work going forwards and try to prioritize it. And I also noticed we were talking about some of the things that we talked about before. They mentioned the fact there were various stakeholders involved. A significant group that was not mentioned in that list, and I'm not trying to criticize here, but is registrars. I mean, if we're going to get this idea adopted, where are we going to get the input from registrars about whether they think it's either a good idea or a bad idea, or if they'd be minded to implement it? And I was talking to a few folk earlier about this, and we can see advantages and disadvantages from registrars from adopting DELEG in some form. Some will see it as a way of offloading the whole DNSSEC problem onto somebody else. Others will see it as a threat to hang on to existing customers. And I think we need to get some input from those guys as part of the development effort when this stuff goes forward. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'll note that in the proposed charter, you might want to stand up a bit later to talk about it, because I was very adamant in putting some bullets in about ordering, right? Requirements come first to figure it out, and registrars are some of the people that we're going to need to talk to. So I think you're spot on with thinking with me at least.
Thanks, Wes. To paraphrase Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'll be back.
Sounds good. Ben.
Hi. So Ben Schwartz, Meta. I just heard Paul Wouters mention the idea that this data should live with the zone, and that and we've had some discussion about whether that could be done by placing these records entirely inside the name server name zone instead of trying to hoist any of this information up into the parent. And my view on that is that I don't think we can expect that that is possible without a performance degradation, and I don't think that we can reach universal deployment if there is any performance degradation. So that's why I think DELEG is needed here, and we cannot achieve the same effect by, for example, putting service binding records under the name server name, which is how I, a year ago, I probably thought that this would all shake out. To Jared's point about being very careful about how we move forward because of the complexity here, I actually disagree. I actually think that's backwards. Because the space is very complicated, we should come up with a very uniform, extensible, simple core and deploy it. And then see what portions of the solution space we can address. Because if we try to map out our entire set of requirements in perpetuity, if we try to figure out if all future versions of TLS are going to be suitable for use with DNS, or how all quick version number negotiation systems are going to interact with DNS, no, we're going to tie ourselves in knots. We should come up with a simple machine and put it out there and give ourselves plenty of wiggle room to fix it later.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Go ahead.
Stefan Bortsmeyer with my registry hat on. This is all the solutions that have been discussed are a lot of work to implement, to deploy, and then to debug, because they open an entire new set of possible problems. Just communicating this outreach to the stakeholders, to all the people who will have to understand this, when these people are already struggling with the DNS that we have today. Call me chicken, but I'm quite frightened by the amount of work and the sheer size of the project. So at this time, I'm not very enthusiastic about it.
All right, thanks very much. I will again invite you as well back during the charter discussion to figure out if we can properly limit the charter to the first tractable bits, because I think that's a good point. Thank you. Liman.
Yes, Lars Liman, NetNode. I see a lot in here that I like. Excuse me. And I think it's definitely worthwhile to explore this, and the IETF is definitely the place to do it. The thing I may want to caution about is that we don't focus on a single problem that we want to solve, but so that we start with exploring what effects we may have on other problems that we may want to solve in the future, so that we don't put a hamstring on ourselves by going one path forward. We block ourselves from other solutions that we may want to do later in time. So do quite a substantial inventory of the problem space, not only particular to the problems we want to solve with DELEG, but other problems that we may want to solve in the future in other parts of the DNS, so that DELEG doesn't block us from solving them in the future. This is, in my view, a first small step towards DNS version 2.0, because this is such a fundamental part of the DNS that it will have a major impact. And if we do take that step, we want to make sure that other parts don't disappear from our future ways of developing. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much. As everybody knows, one of the primary points of a BOF is to determine, could a working group succeed in coming up with something? We don't need to solve the something today, but we do need to figure out, is a success likely? Ted?
Ted Hardy. I wanted to go back to something that Tails said earlier about the 3x5 cards. And I think taking that seriously that the original design of the DNS, or at least the original designer of the DNS, thought it would be possible to swap in a new 3x5 card for a particular function over time. I think it's worth considering that as we look at this, because I think if you take that seriously, this is clearly one of the 3x5 cards, delegation, that's very core to the DNS, and where we have seen changes in what you can delegate to. And I think the service mode of this proposal captures that pretty well. But I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that are not actually on that 3x5 card now, that people are saying, hey, if this 3x5 card changes, I get to write on the new 3x5 card things that weren't in the original and were in other parts of the DNS. And I think what would be very useful for me to evaluate the success of this work or this BOF is to stick to that 3x5 card and say, let's get this done. Let's get the delegation piece done that lets you do the delegation to DOT, DOQ, et cetera. Let's get the aliases pieces of that done and improve the looping problem that's in the current draft. But stop. Figure out what that enables for a second change that isn't on the 3x5 card, that's delegation, and that maybe doesn't belong in the DELEG record, but in something that's enabled by the new delegation. And I think maybe that enables a full DNS 2.0, I don't know. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that people have mentioned on the chat or in other things that are in fact not in the parent zone delegation problem space at all. They're just problems in the DNS that they want somebody to solve. And if you take on that ocean boiling exercise, you will never complete.
So Ted, don't walk away for 1 second.
I didn't volunteer for anything.
Yes, you did. You stood to a microphone.
Stop.
You volunteered. So could I rephrase what you just said as what you would really like to get solved is just the transport aspect of delegation, and you don't see the need for extensibility? And I'm deliberately poking the bear.
So I guess a different way to say it would be that some of these forms of extensibility don't belong in the record that tells you where to go to get the equivalent data from the namespace. And I'll take an example that was used before. The bank which wants to say, by policy, you must have DMARC records below me. This has nothing to do with where do I go to get the next piece of information I need to resolve this name. It is a different problem. It may be a problem that gets more tractable after DELEG is done. That could happen, I don't know. But it is a different problem space that happens to relate to that same parent-child relationship, but is not about delegation.
Great. I think that adds a lot of clarity to your point. Thank you very much. GKG. It's been a long
hi. It's not over yet. So coming after Ted is much easier because I don't have to say most of the things that I wanted to say. Ted said them better than I would have. I just have mentioned in the chat that the range of things people are trying to solve here smells a lot like what dbound got, the swamp that dbound got lost in. And I really do think focusing on a narrow delegation record is the most plausible way forward here. I really think, what that means is that we need to actually make sure we have the people in the room who will be the enablers of this new delegation record, which means that the registries actually need to be on board. We need to know that they will be able and willing to actually deploy this. And I feel like we have not had great luck in doing those sorts of parent-child mechanisms in the past. So I don't know how that needs to be solved, but it needs to be thought through.
All right, thank you. David?
So I'm not speaking on behalf of the rest of the authors with this, but I wanted to wholeheartedly endorse what Ted said. Like if the only thing that actually came out of this originally, the original work, and then nothing else ever came of it, is that we get, signed delegations and secure transport. DELEG is a huge win right there, right? Like we might then argue endlessly about, well, could we do extensibility for dbound, or could we do a DNS v2, right? Okay, maybe nothing ever comes of that. But the thing that I really like about DELEG is that it allows the possibility for that discussion to happen with doing a certain amount of work up front that kind of paves the way for it. And so, yeah, Ted, great. Like, let's focus on solving initially this problem, but understand that like some of us like this particular approach because of the idea of the possibility of doing other things that we're not trying to solve right now, but we want to enable the possibility of solving.
Great, thanks. Andrew?
Andrew Camping, just to amplify one of the points that came up in the chat a few times. I think Tal made the point that sort of registries, registrar's support shouldn't by itself be a blocker. If there are some that don't want to do it, sorry, if there are some registrars that don't want to do it, it shouldn't be a blocker, which I think is fair. But equally, I think it's important to establish whether it's some, most, or many, or what quantity may or may not be interested in this. Because if it's a large number that don't have any interest or inclination, then that's a problem, in my view. So I think it'd be a shame to waste a lot of time and effort on something only to find that it never leaves, it never gets deployed.
Yep, that's spot on. Certainly deployability and the desire for it to be used is always a question in the IETF in general. Having written RFCs that have never been deployed, it happens. All right. So with that, we do want to shift into discussing the charter next, which Paul will pull up momentarily.
Oh, should I? Oh, we aren't just going to go off this. I should pull up the charter.
You put it in a PDF and uploaded it, so I would say yes. Let's have people look at
I
it.
didn't know if you wanted to like emphasize the 3 parts first.
You want to drive these slides? These
No,
are...
no, you are here.
I'm giving you the opportunity, Paul.
I hear that. And let's see. Plus, oh, the first one worked. Wow. Artificial intelligence strikes again.
Yeah, interesting. So this actually shows slightly different in the yeah, it's actually easier to read if you're actually in the full Zoom mode or in the full Meet Echo mode. But it is divided into pieces, right? There's a background and problem space, there's objective and scope, and then there's deliverables. We definitely want to save the deliverables later. I think that's going to be an interesting discussion of what exactly we want to say the working group can accomplish within its initial scope. For the moment being, I will be quiet for a bit, I think, and we'll let you read the background and problem space and see if you think it's good starting text that needs, whether or not it needs discussion or wordsmithing, does it need discussion here today?
Did you say we wouldn't discuss this today?
No, I did. So, more specifically, if you want to discuss aspects of it today, now's the time to raise your hand. If you think there's a word misspelled, don't do that today.
Or do it on the mailing list today. We will catch it.
Pull request.
Oh, stop. So let's give about 4 or 5 minutes on this. I think the objective and scope is going to be. Jim wants in the queue. So, Jim, I see you're in the queue. Let's give people about another minute or 2 to have read, and then we can start queuing on this. Oh, sorry. Didn't see it, but Warren's first. But yeah, let's give people about another minute, and then let's queue on background and problem space. Warren. Oh. Jim.
Thanks, Paul. I think the charter's okay-ish, but I think we need to try and be a little bit clearer about aspects of the scope of what this new working
We'll
group.
do that in a couple of minutes. We're just doing the background and problem space at the moment.
Okay.
Yep. Jeff?
Jeff?
As worthy as paragraph, Jeff Houston, as worthy as paragraph 2 might be, I think it's kind of bullshit. It sort of wanders off into some generic statement of yes, it's a wonderful thing, the DNS. I don't see the point.
That was the point, Jeff.
Just a note, I heard a couple of here's.
Yeah,
over there.
yeah.
Jeff, tell us what you really think.
So, Jeff, can you give me a thumbs up? You would actually just delete it entirely. Not okay. Thank you. Okay. Lots of thumbs up. Ben?
Yeah, so there's this discussion of the need to update parental information that is only in control of the child. I personally think this is kind of cart before the horse. Like, there's a bunch of information that we wish was in the parent and was in control of the child or operator, but that information simply doesn't exist today. The only information that's in the parent is the DS record, the name server name, and potentially glue records. And if you want operator control, then you do an out of bailiwick delegation, you do a glueless delegation, and all that's left is the NS records. And if you don't want to deal with like multiple NS records, there's no actual need to. Like, you can have one NS record with a bunch of IP addresses on it. That's, like, as far as the protocol goes, completely fine. So the only thing that's the only information that's being described here is actually the DNSSEC keying information. There is no other kind of information that meets these criteria. And the DNSSEC keying information is like the most unsolved part of DELEG in my view. That is, we do not have a proposal on the table that would actually allow the operator to take control of that information, update it unilaterally. We have some sketches, and those sketches have some real problems.
Can you send text to the list of how you would change that first paragraph?
Well, okay.
All right, so now seeing that there's nobody else in the queue, let's move on to objective and scope. So we'll give another couple of minutes for people to read that if you didn't make it through that yet. All right, so just for the record, it's really creepy to be sitting in a completely silent working group. Having said that, Warren?
Make it less creepy for us, Warren.
So I don't know if this makes it less creepy, but the fourth paragraph says the first use case for this blah, 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 blah. It's not entirely clear to me that everybody agrees that that is the first use case. I think a number of people think that the signaling of the encrypted transports might be more important, relevant, whatever. I think that some people also think that might be a lot simpler, sort of from a conceptual standpoint. Just use this to connect, not, my thing's over there. So you might need to reconsider the ordering of that.
Would you want this paragraph to say that? Would you want this paragraph to say the first two use cases are, or as compared to putting and ordering here?
The That would make me less twitchy.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't know how everybody else feels.
No, I'm
I
just
think-
saying, but you
yeah,
would be
I
okay
would be
with
okay
a
with that.
paragraph that said the first two use cases are.
Yes, or
Very good.
even, you know, if there's strong agreement that this is the first use case, that's cool. I just don't know if that is.
Okay, great. Thanks.
You actually mirror my thoughts well. Ray?
Yeah, Ray Bellis, ISC. Yeah, actually, a similar comment. I mean, my reading of this is it's kind of ambiguous because it says the first use case is delegation information, it says the second use case is encryption, and then it says the working group will only do delegation. So which is it?
When two different people write a paragraph, that's what you end up with.
So, but let me clarify. The paragraph afterwards is about extensions to the DNS protocol. The first sentence of the paragraph says first use case for this DNS delegation is expected to be delegation aliasing, not delegation. So aliasing is the important word there. So as it stands is first use case is aliasing, the second use case is encrypted transport. Warren has asked for those to be two together, but they both relate to delegation.
I think that still needs some wordsmithing because it's
Okay,
actually
great.
unclear.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, it does appear to explicitly include
Yep.
the transport signaling as in scope. As written.
As always, feel free to propose text, but I think we get the sense of the room that, and it shifted back and forth on the mailing list a lot of what the most important, element was, but encrypted transport and aliasing are the clear two favorite ideas. David, Tail.
Hi, Tail. So to continue just on that thread and to support Warren, I think that just saying the first use case could be simplified to just a potential use case. You don't have to imply a priority to the things. But then you can imply a priority by saying, hey, the doc part is maybe slightly more interesting to the IETF as a whole, whether it is or not, but that you could order that first, but still just call them use cases without stating a preference. And then the other thing I wanted to just address was, and this might be surprising as one of the authors of DELEG, but I think that taking future extensibility into account is a little ambiguous. And for the topic of a working group, I would say, and consider the possibility of future extensibility, right? Like the way it is there, you could infer that it's suggesting that we have to somehow build extensibility into it. And I don't think that's actually the case. It's what I want, but for the working group charter, I think just considering the possibility of extensibility is sufficient.
Great, thanks.
Eric?
Eric Vink, Cisco, and NTD, my other side. Regarding again this fourth paragraph, I would move it one paragraph above, right? Because the use case are linked to requirements and not really to the specification. That's a minor stuff. I'm not sure whether we can only specify delegation aliasing. It's a hint to a specific implementation. But the more important stuff, I think, we need to be sure that the working group will then enforce the sequence requirements to specification. I think must be made stronger there.
So we can either do that here, or we actually do have it strongly in the deliverables.
Yeah,
you would like
either
it
place,
strong
either
in
place.
both of them?
Or in both even.
Okay,
right.
right. Thanks. Andrew?
Hi, Andrew Campling. Two things really. I mean, it's that same paragraph again. It talks about some use cases. It being critical, it doesn't actually say that the working group's going to solve them. And it doesn't really define them. It'd be quite useful to actually spell out what those use cases are and that the working group intends to solve those. To be really clear that it's going to address them. It's just a list of words, like a shopping list, which maybe it's going to solve, maybe they're not. So I think it should be explicit.
Thanks. Lars?
Liman?
Liman, NetNode here. I would, unless it's, how shall I phrase it, obvious that it's part of the requirements part, which is an important thing. I would also like to see an investigation into negative side effects of this, so that the work is scoped properly when it's done. This is in line with our previous comment. What negative side effects will these have? And I would like us to look at that before we start to work at things. Thanks.
Jeff?
Jeff Houston, there's a scoping assumption here that I don't think is adequately addressed. In the initial DELEG proposal, it's not just the parent returning DNS delegation information, it's authoritative information, which is a fundamental change on the existing DNS structure. And if you start to think about, is the derivation of authority necessarily part of the scope here, I would argue that's actually worthwhile looking at and including in the scope. Paul Wouter's comment previously that who is authoritative on the nature of the way in which you contact the name server, surely the name server is a pertinent comment. It's not necessarily the parent or the child, it's a third party. I'm not saying I have any solution in mind, but when you talk about scope, the nature of authority and how it's expressed, I believe is appropriately inside scope here. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish I had thought of that when we were writing that up, because I certainly feel that way.
Jim?
Thanks. Some of the comments that have just been made, or the ones I was wanting to make myself, I think it will be important for any new working group to look at some of these potential unforeseen consequences of this model. And what Jeff was saying before, the idea that we've got to have authoritative information in the parent about stuff that's going on in the child does break one or two things in terms of the DNS model. Okay, maybe it's not going to make a difference on the wire or how the protocol works, but I think there may be some other issues there, but they'll require further thought than we've had at the moment. I would also suggest in terms of the overall objective and scope here, I don't think we need to get involved in the charter about trying to say what the use cases are. I think it'd be better to charter or instruct the working group to come up with the use cases and the requirements and to prioritize them. I don't think we need to put that into the charter. Thanks.
All right, thanks. You seem to align with Lehman in some ways and some of the things you said. Yes, Paul?
Paul Wouters, individual. One thing I find missing here is the analysis of whether we can actually viably do a new RR type that resolves at the parent. Like basically doing another sort of round of DS changed behavior that's very fundamental to the DNS protocol. And there might be an answer there where we end up saying like, maybe this is not possible and we should change the solution space based on what is possible. And I find that the objective here kind of assumes that doing a new RR type that resolves at parent is a given. And I find that part to maybe need more attention.
So one of the things I have been like restructuring based on people's comments on the fly, and I just posted something actually to the chat, but the deployability, I think, is one of the things that you're essentially highlighting, right, Paul? It's like coming up with something that actually can't be used in the real world would be a bad thing. So, you know, is there an avenue that this actually will achieve deployment? I think is a critical aspect. Yeah. So we are out of the queue. So let's move. Oh, Dwayne. Sneaking under the wire. And then we're going to move on to deliverables after that.
Dwayne Wessels from VeriSign. Sorry for being sneaky. So DELEG requires more than just DNS changes, right? It requires EPP changes, I think. This charter doesn't say anything about non-DNS protocols. Should it at least acknowledge that those changes are needed in other protocols, and whether or not those may or may not be in this proposed working group?
So should it sound, not to be critical, but it sounds like you're saying an objective and scope is to figure out whether we're going to do them or not. I had left that out, even though I'm the author of the first EPP extension thing. I just thought that would come in the working group later. You would like that in here as a objective and scope?
Well, it feels like at least an acknowledgement that that work needs to be done.
Okay.
In if not in the proposed working group, in the other, in regex or whatever,
So the last sentence originally said the working group will only specify extensions to the DNS protocols. If I change that to DNS and EPP, that would cover it?
Well, I mean, I think you need.
No. That's not,
we need to discuss if that's if that's right. I don't know. I just noticed that it doesn't say anything right now.
Yeah, I think for things like that, the working group will work with other working groups on potentially blah, 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 right? So like, we're not going to do EPP extensions, they might.
Well, and Warren, just because you and I had a conversation about this yesterday, you also don't believe that EPP is the end all and be all, and that therefore some other things
Yeah,
might need.
the
need
working
to be
group
done.
will coordinate with other working groups if extensions to their protocols are needed, something.
Okay, great.
All right, so let's go back to another uncomfortable few minutes of silence as we read the deliverables.
Let me see. No, that's smaller.
That's bigger on your screen. But
That's bigger on my screen. That doesn't help. I
The,
don't
this
know
the
how
slides are in the slide decks. The very last slide in the slide decks is the
Yeah.
PDF with the charter. It's also in the mailing list.
Yeah, I would say we'll give you an extra minute to pull up the slides from the data tracker and have them on your screen. And we're doing fine on time, by the way. This is great. Thank you very much. No, this is the whole 40 minutes. And I think we're doing fine. Yeah, because clearly we have to do stuff at the end of the thing. Oh, I thought you were pointing at your clock. I was, but yeah, it is. But yes, my clock says we still got like half an hour, so we're good. Okay, we've got people queuing up. I want to acknowledge that this section and the previous section, Wes and I sort of thought stood independently, and we heard a bunch of comments on the last section indicating that the two don't. So don't worry about what was there and what was here. That can be fixed. So like, oh, this should be above or below. Let's not go there. Let's actually go to what we think the deliverables are. Ben, you're first.
Hi. I find the second point pretty confusing. I think I would just personally get rid of it. But it sounds like the working group is instructed to develop, but not publish, a list of extensions to DELEG that go beyond the requirements, but are outside of the scope of the working group and will not actually be addressed.
So
that's like a weird thing to ask for. I would just.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So, I mean, I wrote that sentence, so I will own up to it. The thing that I think a lot of people in the discussion had concerns about was until we make sure we get requirements from all the different types of people in the ecosystem, registrars was the one mentioned earlier today, it's hard to, and then determine a list of what are all the cool things that we could do with such a mechanism if it's built extensible. If, on the other hand, this room decides that, no, let's just do transport and aliasing, or whatever else, then that second one can be dropped. But the point of the second one was, if people do want to do brainstorming about, if this existed, we could do policy or whatever else. I'm ambivalent, right? I actually don't have a skin in this game. That list should be carefully developed and prioritized so that the working group does not do them all at once. That was sort of the purpose of that sentence, but I agree it's not well written. Does that make sense?
I guess I sort of understand that. I feel like it would be more helpful, more straightforward to just have sort of a non-normative sentence, and I think we do somewhere saying, the working group will consider the value of extensibility in this context.
Okay. Mike?
I also wanted to say there's a lot of language here about signaling mechanism between a parent and a resolver. And I think that strikes me as an unnecessary constraint on the solution space For example, I think that there are some variations here where we end up needing an EDNS flag between the resolver and the participating name server. So I wouldn't want anybody to think that that was somehow out of scope.
Fair point. Thanks, Mike.
So on the second one, I'm just kind of comparing this to when we were developing Quick. We were chartered to build support. When we were building Quick, our charter was to support HTTP as the first and primary application layer protocol. But also we knew people were working on DNS over Quick, and there was a lot of like, yeah, let's not make that decision because it would block something they need. And so I kind of see this second bullet as, I don't know that we actually need a document. Maybe it's just in scope that we should know that other people are going to try and use the extension mechanisms we build. Consider that if we build it. The first one strikes me as the exact bounds of our charter are too complicated to figure out in one BOF, so we're going to write the rest of our charter as the first thing the working group does. For the other ones, I'm not sure they have to be separate RFCs. We may not want to constrain ourselves that way, but they certainly could be.
This does not constrain them to be separate RFCs.
All right. Thank you, Mark. All right. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Wes. I like the start of bullet number 1, but one of the things that I put in the chat. Thank you, Mark. Yep. Thanks, Wes. I like the start of, but one of the things that I put in the chat.
I think he has his mic on.
Yeah, you need to
I like the start of.
mute your audio. That's an amazing delay.
You can come back into the queue, but do have your speaker off next time, Mark. Thanks. Eric?
Okay, and just to be sure, I'm on Earth, not on the moon, so there should be no echo, right? So on the first one, right, I think we need a working group consensus on this one. So working group last call must be done, obviously. And as we talk about other working group, like DNS OP and maybe others, it will be very nice to have an IETF last call on the first document. While we are there, why not publishing as an informational RFC to enforce the IETF-wide consensus? Just a strong suggestion, by the way, right?
Yeah, thank you. So I believe you are actually advocating that the words that say an RFC is not needed, that actually one is needed because you want the wideness of the.
Exactly. This is a shortcut. It's easier to write informational RFC.
Okay. Thank you. Paul?
Paul Oates, individual. I was really scared to read the deliverables because of some concerns I had. But then when I read them, I was actually really happy with the first 2 points. But because those really cover the fact that I was concerned that we would steamroll into a solution without actually standing still and taking another inventory of the whole space. So I'm really happy with those first 2 points. So thank you. Then on the last point, it talks about encrypted transport. I would remove the word encrypted and talk just about transport, because I think a lot of other transport properties are just as important as encryption. Like Quick would give us maybe avoiding line blocking and other things. So I think just talking about transport instead of just encrypt, I would want to move away from the focus of encryption being the only thing we really care about. Like we actually care about other things in transport too, like packet sizes, or can we fire multiple packets at once and get reliable answers.
A security AD telling us to take the word encrypted off of one of our requirements was not on my bingo card today.
Jeff? I do have a modest proposal based on my last comments, Jeff Houston, that if you include in the deliverables a document to list the options or mechanisms for a parent zone or operator to assemble the necessary information that permits it to authoritatively serve delegation information, might be appropriate. It's without saying you've got to figure it out, but at least you've got a reference that the parent needs to gather that information in order to serve it authoritatively.
I like the authoritative. That
Yeah,
that does bring that into sort of everything we're doing.
And that's why I think it would be a deliverable as much as it is part of scope.
And
Please send that to the
you're
list.
going to send that to the list, right?
Oh, I'll cut and paste.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Where are we? Andrew.
Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Campling. Just a thought, the bottom two, effectively, you're saying you want RFCs against the use cases that are covered in the scope section. So why not just, rather than make them specific as they are there, make it more generic, because you might change what's in the scope section above.
So I'm not sure what you're saying there. You're saying if we change the scope to include more, we would add more bullets at the bottom, or?
No, the opposite. I'm saying rather than list each of them here, you could just say that for any use cases, there will be one or more RFCs coming out the other end.
I think people wanted to know which things we were starting on. That was where Wes and I started. And those were the two that we started with one, and then on the mailing list, people said, please add the second.
Yeah, fair enough. But I thought that would be what the scope's for rather than that.
Oh, I see. In the IETF deliverables, the listed deliverables is where everyone's eye goes to first. So that's pretty much why we do that. And actually, Warren, can you hang for a second? One of the things that Wes and I forgot to say is once we do this and we get, the charter proposed wording on the list, this goes off to the ISG. The ISG is under no obligation to do any of what we did or to not change our words. So what I just said to you, Andrew, was, what I meant to say was the ISG generally likes this, and the ISG, part of the ISG is about to change tomorrow and such like this. This is not a guarantee that even if we all are holding hands and singing Kumbaya, that the ISG is going to say, you get those exact words. So it's fine for us to try to guess what the ISG wants, but we may be surprised. Warren, as an ISG member.
The ISG has reviewed your charter. Pray we do not review it more. So 2 things. The easy one first. I know that you say that the bottom 3 things, don't have to be separate documents, but one kind of assumes it is if you read it like that. Maybe it's worth saying, these may be one document or more, something. Now the trickier one. I think that Eric Fink strongly suggested that we do the requirements first and finish the requirements and do a working group last call and get it, published as an RFC and blah, 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 blah.
Which means an IETF last call as
requires
well.
IETF last call and all the faffle. I don't know how everybody else feels like that, like how strongly he's pushing that, what Paul thinks, etc. Is the working group okay just stopping? Well, not quite stopping, but making sure that this is all done first. Come back and elaborate on that.
Okay, first we are negotiating the charter, right? So everything is open, of course. Yeah, but as always, right, nothing prevents start working, even now, right, on the solution, knowing that the solution can be thrown to /dev/null if it contradicts this one. I think we agree, right? So,
Yeah, the important thing is that whatever solution comes out, regardless of when people start working on it, including yesterday, it had better meet the requirements that come out of the requirements document. And if it doesn't, you might have to throw it in dev null. You're right. Jim.
Thanks, Wes. 2 points, just like Warren. First one is an easy one. Second one, maybe not so easy. As far as the documents that have been talked about here is, I'm not too keen on the idea of something that might just live as an internet draft that goes on and on and on forever, because that inevitably means we don't really have a deadline. And of course, when deadlines aren't fixed, things just drift along without reaching a conclusion. And I don't think that's a good thing to do in this particular scenario. And I wouldn't worry too much about whether documents have to be published as RFCs or not. Obviously, I think they're better as RFCs, but maybe all we need to call out is the ones that have to or should be standards track. The others could be issued as informationals or whatever, but I don't think we have to get too involved in the nitty-gritty of that. Just say that the working group is expected to produce a whole bunch of documents, A, B, C, and D, and if there's one that's a specific need that has to become a standards track, then call that one out specifically. The other point I wanted to make was actually something Mira made in the chat earlier about consideration of the consequences. I think that's something that should be part of the overall charter here. I mean, we're saying this thing's an interesting idea, but we're talking about things that make some changes to the way which the DNS protocol works, and we really should give some proper thought to that. We've been very guilty of that across the IETF and specifically in the DNS about doing things we thought were cool because they're interesting from a technical point of view and interesting things to implement, but the reality was rather different when it comes to actual deployment and uptake. So we should think very, very carefully about that before we start going ahead with just writing specs for things.
So we can't design the coolest camel ever?
Well, you can design it, but you better think about how you're actually going to make it.
Jim, would you consider that discussion of expected ramifications or whatever to be appropriate for the requirements document or a separate document?
I think it might be better as a separate one, but I don't have a strong feeling either way, Paul.
Cale?
Hi, Dale. To address Jim first, I agree with that too, as far as there are consequences to protocols outside the IETF, to the DNS industry and other aspects of that. So I definitely think that those should be explicit considerations that went into, how we developed whatever we end up developing. The reason I got up though was also just to ask whether I've already heard some discussions about this, and I don't know if it is currently appropriate for the room or not, or whether this is just something the IESG and ADs have to fight amongst themselves about, but which area? Ops, int, like this has come up as a thing, and I don't know if it's something we would discuss here now.
I don't think we should discuss it here because regardless of our discussion, that is going to be a serious discussion in the ISG. And we have no idea what the political, stuff behind it is. So I believe strongly that we should let them do that, however they want to do that.
And with that, Warren?
I was in the queue before that. So I think I'd just like sort of plus one what Jim said. We should make it clear that we have thought through how this is going to impact the whole system. Like the DNS is very much core plumbing. And good, there's no John Scudder here. Probably even more so than like BGP and, we replaced IP with IPv6. This is the last sort of really core plumbing protocol that we haven't poked yet. So we should be careful. Even if we don't break it, we should make clear to other people we considered it.
Yeah, I think a common theme that we've heard through all of the discussion today is make sure this is deployable, right? And that doesn't just mean can we deploy the new stuff. It also means please don't break the old stuff. Yeah, I think that's a very common theme. Last call for comments and questions anywhere on the charter. Otherwise, we
have heard lots. We're not about to say, is this charter good enough? That there's definitely, we will have more on the list before we do that. And which means, I forget, in a BOF, can you have a BOF last call?
I don't know what that is.
Exactly. So we will have much, we've been taking notes. Pete's been doing minutes and such like that. The charter itself will be discussed much more on the mailing list. And at some point we will call it done. And then we will talk about then taking it to the ISG. We can still use the mailing list for other things, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves because I believe, quite frankly, given the number of interesting new ideas and disagreements so far today, it's not clear what we're going to hear back from the IESG. It's not like the mailing list is going to close, but I would say once we've sent off a charter to the ISG, we should let them really do their thing and come back to us with either yep, you're a working group and we've put you in the general area, or or no, you're not going to be a working group, forget it. Like we should really trust the ISG to do the right thing here. Eric, you've gotten back in the queue.
Eric, just a quick one. This RSC 5434, I'm pretty bad with numbers, so I need to get it in front of me. You know, after above, we need to answer 5 questions. Is there a problem needing
I
to
will
be-
admit that I had no idea about that, so thank you.
Oh, wow. So there is a problem that needs to be solving. I think the answer is yes, right? So that's easy. Is there a critical mass of participants willing to work? I think yes.
Yes.
The scope of the problem is well defined and understood. You're kidding me.
I'm fast.
And agreement on the specific set of deliverable. I think beside world tuning, we got it. And reasonable probability of having success. I think so as well. Reasonable, right? So
Well, so he answered all the questions. We don't actually have to ask anymore.
Right.
He said, yes, we've already succeeded. But yeah, so
When we fill out the form, we will do that.
yeah. But I mean, this is one of the critical. I mean, there's a few. I deliberately put the easy one first, right? Are there people in the room willing to work on this problem space, regardless of exactly what the charter looks like? Is this something that people actively want to work on?
Sorry, stupid technical question, but where the hell is the button on the small client? Because I don't see where I can vote.
Don't let Warren vote for you. Okay, so we're getting close to the end. Jim?
Thanks, Paul. My question is about next steps. I think we're probably heading towards having a new working group, but I'm not quite sure what the next steps are going to be. We're going to have some more work done on the charter, so presume that's going to be discussed on the list. But is there going to be a cut-off date when we try to reach some kind of resolution and when we've got an agreed charter?
Yep.
And would that be in time for, say, having another BOF in Vancouver, or are we looking further out?
We don't know. We don't know. And even once we're done with the charter, we don't know how long it's going to take for the ISG to do it. The good news is because we have so many people interested, and the ISG is going to know that, they will probably keep us informed on, for example, scheduling for Vancouver or possibly even before. I mean, here, I'll just do a wild one of we finish the charter in 2 weeks from now. And again, I'm being silly here. We finish the charter in 2 weeks from now. We do a 2-week last call. We send it to the ISG, and a week later, they come back and say, you're a working group. We could, in fact, have, an interim or whatever. And I'm saying that because we just don't know, like, how this will all happen. I'm going to trust the ISG to show good effort on this. Not because they always show good effort, but when, I'm sorry? I didn't hear.
We're all amused by your trust.
Okay. I have noticed in the past when there's a lot of people interested on a topic and have said they're going to do work, we get a better result from them. So I think that this is one of those.
Okay.
So somebody's going to say something, somebody more important than Wes and I is going to say something on the mailing list after we have sent the charter off to the ISG.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. I'd just say to our beloved area directors, it'd be nice if you give us an indication as what they thought the likely timing might be.
They don't know when we're going to get them a charter. We still have a bunch of work to do on the list in the coming weeks.
Warren?
Yeah, I mean, a fair bit of the next time, depends on how quickly people get to a charter, how clear everybody agrees on the charter. But I mean, looking around, I think generally this seems to have been relatively successful. The fun part will be the food fight over who gets to own this. One thing which I might do, which is somewhat unusual, is I might be sending out email to the list or something asking for who's willing to chair it. It would be useful to have like a large sort of swath of people who we could consider from. Might choose from a different group, but would be useful to also have some newcomers, etc., who haven't chaired before, be interested in.
You can speak for both of us.
So before you sit down, Warren, we are pretty much at the end of the session to a large extent. Is there anything else that the ADs, any of the ADs in the room would like us to discuss today before we close?
Nope, I was going to suggest we go through the list of questions and how to run a successful buff, but Eric kindly, stood up and did that, and I think we have at least vague answers to most of them. The sort of scope. Oh dear, he's behind me. I should sit down.
No, Eric, you can stand up. Still stand up. Just one thing, you were quite optimistic. If you say ISG in 1 week, it will mostly take 2 + 2 weeks, right? We are running by format cycle. But I don't see any objection on this. Honestly, it will be one of the easiest working group we will be forming.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. I will get blocking
we still
comments
can
on the
break
charter,
it,
right?
Yeah, we have an opportunity to break it. So, Paul, since you are also an AD.
Yeah, technically, yes. But not in this room, but I'll abuse it anyway. I just want to say, on the list and both in person at the previous IETF, the emotions were super high and people were really emotional, really, strong opinions. Today, this session was fantastic. Everybody was so civilized. Applaud for us. It's really good.
Great. Thank you.
All the credit goes to Paul for that.
Yeah, right.
Miria?
Yeah, I was going to call on her. That's great.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you.
she put herself in the queue.
Oh, I didn't see that. Thank you, Mary.
Hello. I'm trying to report back for the IAB on this thing, and I would still be interested to do a poll on the question about the scope, because I believe it sounds like everybody's clear about the scope, but sometimes doing the poll actually gives some more insights.
A poll about what
The
about
scope.
the scope?
Is the scope clear?
Oh,
Yeah.
is the scope clear?
Like the question 2 or 3 from the
Okay.
BOF draft.
That's up to him. He knows how to use the tool, not me.
Yeah.
And we do have 9 minutes still, so. No. That would be called premature optimization.
So I'm going to phrase this a little funky because all questions should be phrased funky. They never go perfectly well. But because we've done some non-actual editing, I'm going to put, given the discussion today, everybody heard it. It seemed like, there was rough consensus reached. Is the scope discussed today clear enough to ask the IESG for a working group?
He set his phone on fire. Yeah, right. Okay.
So that's not, the results are not surprising to me because we do need to work toward the scope and write down what was said and go through the mailing list, which Paul and I already agreed, is the next step. So there will be more to iterate on, but I think the scope will become more clear. How many minutes do we have left? 8. If anybody has a particular, complaint, about the scope, feel free to jump in. Warren, you were already up. Go ahead, and then Maria.
Yeah.
I think it might be useful to do another poll on, do we think that we can get to a scope that is clear enough, right? Are we so far away on the scope that we'll never manage to get this sorted out? Or do we think some of it was is it clear as written? I couldn't figure out if you meant, is the scope clear as written? Or, I think we can get to a scope that everybody largely agrees with. But the way that was worded was phrased more as, would you do this one now?
I warned you. Yeah. Okay. So
Actually, before you do it, why don't you let Mira ask if do you have some words you would like us to ask?
No, not for the question, but I want to just, I brought this up because right now I would write in my report that I believe there are people in the room who actually think this, everybody in the room wants to do this extension, but I think there are people in the room who think this is a really big thing and we're changing the whole model of DNS, and there are some people in the room who believe this is just a minor extension. And this was also a discussion that the ISG had about this proposal, and I believe that is still not clear. That is what I would write in my report for the ISG at this point of time.
Okay.
So Warren, they liked your question better than my question.
Even if you turned off your phone.
And that is basically how I felt the room was going to go as well. That the scope is not totally out of line with where we're going to go. It just needs the wordsmithing, not the it's totally wrong.
I'm going to do you have to do stuff on the mailing list. So, yeah. So we are almost done. I'm going to play the sort of heavy here. This community tends to be much more active at face-to-face meetings than on mailing lists. That won't work for a charter discussion. We know that there are at many places in the proposed charter that are open that we've got suggestions on. We need you to be active on the mailing list. And I'm speaking not only to the people in the room, but all the people remote and such like that. If you punt now, we're going to get an insufficient charter. So please, please, please plan on staying active on the mailing list, at least until we get a rough consensus for the charter to send to the ISG. If you think that this was great, thank you, but this is great lead into more work that we need to do on the mailing list for at least a few more weeks. Yeah, sorry. It is the mailing list that we've been using, which is dd@ietf.org. Any last questions? I see tail getting up. Yeah.
Just a real quick thing that I've had to make the point about just a couple of times. My personal domain name, which you will see in my from address when you reading the DD mailing list, is unrelated. It's just a coincidence. so dd.org, no relation.
Right. Nor if you've seen the testing that I was doing at the hackathon where I took deleg.top. That was because it was cheap.
All right. With that, I think we'll call this a success. And thank you all for coming and participating. It's been an excellent discussion today. And enjoy your lunch. And the rest of the day is going to be mellow for me. Thanks.
Very good. Yeah, that went great. I'm sorry. That went great, modulo everyone still staying active on the